Well, Keith, here we are 4 years later. I guess I should say over 4 years later, and we're still talking about this case.
That
Uh,
long? Goodness. Yeah.
yeah, we were in Hawaii in January of 2020, and here it is. What are your thoughts as, Chad Daybell's trial is set to get underway?
Well, there was such a wow contagion of interest in the Lori Vallow portion of things. Whether or not that holds up for Chad is unclear at the moment. Although there doesn't seem to be the lead up there was for her of public interest. Except I'm talking about, I'm quite a ways away. Are you seeing more of it there?
Not as much. I do
No.
think, though, now that we have the cameras, the court cameras that are going to be showing it, maybe that'll build. But
May-
we've seen she has much different uh her personality, how she acts in court is far different than how Chad acts.
Well, right. And from the very beginning, we had a couple of phone calls with Chad before he actually was arrested, as I think you know. And his demeanor then was pretty much the same as it has been every other time I've heard him speak, which is very low key, very soft, very quiet. In that particular conversation, he seemed to have a tone that suggested he knew the jig was up. But yeah, he's a very different kind of person altogether.
Right.
But I thought the real puzzle here to me has always been who was driving the bus. Was it Chad and his way out there ideas that he published, or and that she decided was the most wonderful thing she ever heard, and he was telling her she was an angel, so, or a goddess, so she bought into it and went along with what he wanted, or was she manipulating him? And I don't know. Clearly the law seems to think he bears more culpability, wouldn't you say?
Right. Yeah. Well, and the prosecutors are going after the murder of Tammy for him, not just the conspiracy like they were on Lori. And of course, his is the death penalty, which we didn't have in Lori's case. So that complicates, not complicates it. I guess it raises the bar a little bit more where this is a human life, that could face the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So what will you be watching for this time around?
Chad has just been so circumspect the whole time. I doubt very much that he will testify, but in fact, why would he? I'm sure he won't. But boy, would I love to see that. And I will be watching to see what kind of a defense can be put forward for the guy. He laid out so much of his odd philosophy in the things he wrote about, and then the physical evidence in this case is just so overpowering, it's so disturbing that I'm going to be very interested to see what his defense could possibly be.
Yeah, are you surprised in a way that he hasn't taken a plea agreement by now, or tried to, make this go away by just going to prison for life?
Yes and no. You know, Chad, like Lori, is a true believer, and I think has remained, as far as I know, and you probably know better than I, but has remained a true believer all this time. A true believer in a theology which is just so far out there that very few people actually believe it. But he's, as far as I can tell, seems to have stuck to that notion. Have you heard contrary to that?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think it stems to, like you said, being a true believer before this case, back when he was writing these books and
Yeah.
years before, and
Sure.
telling other people about these beliefs. But there was something about Lori Vallow that day they met that supercharged it or elevated it.
Sure it did, didn't it? And
Right.
her enthusiasm for, well, as we looked into her background, you could see that she would habitually develop incredible enthusiasm for a new person in her life. And that she was very, those early the early part of those relationships were intense, real sort of falling in love relationships. And then later on, they would all, fall apart in rancor and
Right.
animosity. And that may have been in the future for them had they not engaged in the behavior they did. But you could see where her relationships were so intense. His had been laconic for a long time with his wife. It just had been easy peasy and probably a little boring. And to have that sudden intensity inserted into his life had to have changed him in some way. And I can see him feeling like he was carried along helplessly on the power of her magnetism and the fact that she seemed to be in love with him, and that it just he became putty in her hands. That's what makes me think. There's just no scientific evidence for this at all, but just male-female relationships. That's what makes you wonder who really was behind this.
Right. And you spoke with people. I've spoken with people that knew Lori well that said she just had that type of personality where you'd meet her and she'd suck you in. I mean, just bubbly and beautiful, one of those type of people.
Yeah. And many people who knew her along the way said that.
Right.
And those who knew her superficially, especially. So friends she would encounter, friends with a small f. So in other words, not that close friends, but people who would encounter her at church or, with the children, who would see her occasionally and see, therefore, the behavior that she wanted the world to see, saw somebody who was amazing and wonderful and charismatic. And it was only those, I think there's a kind of personality, again, no scientific basis for this at all, just everything that we know about Lori suggests to me that it's that way. A kind of personality which is effervescent and charismatic with people who are not terribly close to her.
Right.
And the closer they get, the more complicated it becomes, until those who are very close to her see a whole different side of her altogether.
Right. So I'll ask you a question that I kind of hate being asked, like, what's your favorite story or what's the most memorable story? But where would this one, I guess, rank as far as all of the stories you've covered? I mean, obviously for me, I don't think I'll ever have one that'll top this, but you've covered some crazy, bizarre stories. But I heard that when you did the first Dateline, you were at 30 Rockefeller jumping between edit bays and fine tuning everything. And I know when we were waiting for the verdict, you were texting me every hour, what's the latest? And we were going back and forth. I mean, you clearly were into the story, at least from an observer's point of view.
Completely besotted by the story.
Right.
No, not by what happened in the story. Boy, God,
right.
Just yeah, very, very few things could ever loom larger in my memory than this one. There have been a few that come close, but pretty extraordinary tale. Pretty extraordinary.
Well, I think it's 8 or 9 or 10 hours of Dateline plus the Mommy Doomsday podcast.
Sure, which lots of people listen to. Right.
Speaking of podcasts, tell us about your new one that's hot off the presses, hot off your earlobes.
I'll boast for a minute.
Please.
Not even bragging.
Yes.
That today it leapt on #1 on Apple Podcasts. So
nice.
About that. It's called Murder in the Hollywood Hills. And it's a story about the intersection between hope and ambition and enthusiasm for life and those who would take advantage of it. The tall, handsome, slippery guy who offers the young, hopeful woman some possibility in life that she never thought she would have, and things happen after that. But then the guy behaves that way again and again and again, and eventually there are enough people to band together and do something about him. And that's the most remarkable part of this story, in my view. I don't know what's clear enough with you about what it is, but I try not to give too much away, you know.
Right. Well, I know it's going to be good. I haven't listened to it yet. That's what I plan to do at the end of when the trial's over, at the end of the day.
Yeah, so there you go. There you go.
But was it the Blue Mustang? The girl in the Blue Mustang?
The Girl in the Blue Mustang was nominated for Crime Podcast of the Year. I don't believe we won, but we're up in the award ceremony. Was last night. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, congrats for the nomination. It was a great podcast that you should all listen to. Any other exciting projects down the line, Keith? Are you ever going to write a book?
Well, I don't know. Probably not. Probably not. I mean, I'd have too much fun doing what I'm doing right now. And why would anybody want to read a book that I would write? But they certainly would want to read a book written by an excellent writer who had a story to tell. When there's a stage one goes through in life where your favorite author is Kurt Vonnegut. It happens to a lot of people, especially when they're a certain age, usually younger. And they read Slaughterhouse-Five, and they read, some of the other very curious and interesting and wonderful books that Kurt Vonnegut wrote, and become enthralled by him. But long way into a saying that he had, which he taught his students in his creative writing courses that he taught at the university. Anybody can learn to write well, but not everybody has a story, and you have to have a story inside that you really want to tell, and something to say, something worth saying. And so that's always the question. If you got something worth saying, write a book. If you want to just sort of maunder around in your own life, well, that's kind of boring. I don't think I want to do that.
Well, I'm sure there's an argument that you have stuff to say, so I would read it, Keith.
Well, thank you.
Anything else that you want to add about, the Daybell case or what,
No, it's just, I remain very curious. The man is charged with a capital crime. He could face the death penalty, where certainly from, the public's point of view, the person they most identify with what of the terrible events that happened in this story was Lori Vallow. So Chad was always the quiet one in the background. That's going to parse out in this coming trial. We'll see, who did what, and that's going to be a fascinating thing to observe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Keith. Always good seeing you.
Good to see you, Nate. You take care.